My guest composer of the month for November 2022 is the one and only Sarah MacDonald. And this is the third installment of Composers in Conversation. And I'm really honored and delighted to have Sarah to come and talk to me now. So welcome, Sarah. And please, could you just tell me a little bit about yourself and about your musical background?
Yep, I'm Canadian and I am director of music at Selwyn College, Cambridge, which is where I am right now in my room in college. I also run the girl choristers at Ely Cathedral, and I'm a composer and um, conductor and organist and pianist and do all kinds of that sort of thing. And I teach and examine for the music faculty and for the Royal College of Organists. And I'm delighted to be here. So thanks for having me.
Thank you very much. Okay, so, I feel very honored considering how incredibly busy you obviously are. So I first encountered your music when I heard a broadcast of a motet called Crux Fidelis on Radio 3 last year, which was part of a broadcast of compositions by women composers. And that was sung by the BBC Singers. And I was absolutely bowled over by the emotional intensity and the sheer build-up of this composition. So I wondered if to kick off with, you could perhaps say a little bit about Crux Fidelis.
Yeah, it's been quite a popular piece for me. In fact, I just had a commercial recording just finished yesterday of a choir doing it, which is great. I'm pleased it's been so popular. It's had a slightly funny birth because I didn't set out to write something. It was just when Louise Stewart was compiling the first volume of the Multitude of Voices anthologies, she just said to me, "Yikes, we haven't got anything for Passiontide. Can you think of anything?" And I sort of said, "No, actually, shall I write something?" And I spent a little bit of time, like a couple of hours, looking for text. I specifically wanted text by a female writer. So it combines two poems, one by Emily Dickinson and one by Emilia Lanier. And I just sort of picked and chose bits that worked. And I wanted something that was meditative and would work in a kind of Stations of the Cross or Good Friday service or whatever. But I also wanted something that singers would want to sing. So I wanted it to have quite a sort of impassioned build-up and actually some really loud singing. And there's a very ordinary bog standard chain of suspensions at the end, which I know sopranos love. So it's just over a circle of fifths, it's it's, as I say, I think I basically wrote it in about 24 hours, but it's been surprisingly popular, which is nice.
Well, it's an interesting thing about the compositional process in that sometimes if one is trying very hard to be original, it can end up coming across contrived. And sometimes if you just relax, then all of those things that you've learned subconsciously over the years can just gel together. And it's said that the unconscious mind can process at a much deeper and broader level. And so often the trick to writing one's masterpiece is simply not to try to write a masterpiece.
Yeah.
Okay, which brings us very neatly on to another question that I wanted to ask you about. As a composer myself, I'm absolutely fascinated by the process of composition. So, for instance, one of my favorite books is by Jesse Owens, and it's called Composers at Work. And it's all about the processes of Renaissance composers. And given that my primary research interest now is Renaissance music, and my style of composition is based on the Renaissance and revisiting its techniques, I found this book absolutely just so intriguing and absorbing. So I would like to ask you about your compositional process. Do you do, for example, a lot of sketching? Do you revise your pieces obsessively and so on?
It depends. Sometimes it's just there and I just write down what's already there. Sometimes I sometimes it takes me longer and I have to do some sketching. I have a book which is really sweet. It was given to me by one of my choristers, but it's basically it's just manuscript, which is the most useful notebook I've ever been given. I think people don't realize, people give you nice little booklets and stuff for writing words in, and I've never used them, but this one I use all the time, and I just scribble something down, and then I think, like you, I rely a lot on pretty traditional techniques. I think I am a composer, but I don't tend to think of that as being the first thing on my list of what I do. And certainly the first, I don't know, 10 or 15 years of my compositional existence was purely out of liturgical necessity, i.e. I needed something and it didn't exist, so I had to write it myself. And it turns out that now I've had a lot of stuff published, and a lot of it's getting sung and played, and I'm even getting actual commissions that pay me some actual money, which is a bit of a novelty. But I don't sort of sit down and say, if somebody says, what do you do? I'm a conductor, I'm an organist, I'm a director of music, I'm a pianist. Oh yes, and I do some composition as well.
So how do you find time to do all of these things?
I don't. The only reason I found time for this is because it's half term at Ely. Yeah, I don't have a lot of time, if truth be told. And it's funny, I've got a commission from the Association of Anglican Musicians right now, which I told them I need to get written before Friday when I go back to Ely. And I still haven't heard from the director of the choir what text he wants me to set, how many parts he wants it in. So I sent him a third email this morning saying, it's not going to happen before Epiphany if it doesn't happen before Remembrance. So yeah.
Goodness me. Do you find, though, so if there's a lot of pressure, time pressure especially, do you find that to be a creative spur, or is it just something that invokes panic?
It invokes panic a little bit. It invokes insomnia. I tend to, I'm a very, very early riser, and 5:30 becomes 5 o'clock on days when there's, and I get up, and I always did that as a kid. I got up every morning at an ungodly hour and did an hour of scales at the piano before I did anything. So it's kind of built into the discipline. But if I need to, I answer email at 5 o'clock in the morning in order to be able to do, other stuff later in the day or whatever. Sometimes I prioritize, especially if I've got a day where I've got, a rehearsal in the morning and then I've got evensong, but I've got a chunk in the middle. I will sometimes actually just write that off and go and hide in a corner and turn the internet off. In order to get a deadline met if I need to.
That's very interesting that you mentioned turning the internet off, because I don't know if you've read it, but there's quite an influential book called Deep Work by Cal Newport that was published a few years ago. But he identifies that Twitter and Facebook and other social media are actually quite a barrier to serious professionals these days, because temptation, I just look at my Twitter, and the next thing you know, you've lost an hour getting sidetracked with things. Do you find that when the pressure's really on, you find it helpful just to completely isolate yourself and get stuck in?
Yes, that's what I have to do. And I can't do it for very long because people send me emails all the time and say, why haven't you replied to this or whatever? So I have to turn stuff off, because otherwise, sometimes I'll leave my email on if I'm working in the middle of the day, but I will stay away from social media, because that's in particular, except for when, like today, I was working and then the BBC pops up and says that cabinet minister's been suspended for going on "I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here" or some utter rubbish, and you think, what are they thinking? But I did actually go down that rabbit hole instead of finishing whatever phrase I was writing.
Yeah, exactly. This is a tragedy of social media, because it can be very useful, because I've had opportunities come to me because of social media, and I make new friends through social media, but at the same time you have to be so strict with it, because you could be writing Crux Fidelis, and instead you're reading some outrageous things said by some silly politician somewhere. So this right is just so hard. Okay, so I would like to ask you about another one of your compositions, if I may. And this one particularly appealed to me for several reasons. It's In Te Domine Speravi.
Yes.
And this is appealing to me for two principal reasons. First of all, it's a 40-part canon, which I think is a really magnificent idea. And the other thing which I really liked about it is the way that this text spells out the acrostic quarantine. And so I thought, you know, this is somebody who might be a fellow Josquin fan.
Yeah, it's funny, that one was also written very quickly because I just got the idea. And I'm one of those people that the more constraints there are, the easier I find it to write. So if I'm just given, you know, blank manuscript paper, that's much harder than if I've actually got a list of the things that I must achieve. And so for that one, it was written for Anna Lapwood and Pembroke Choir in the middle of lockdown, #1. And obviously we were all doing services like this, you know, and we all know that you can't speak at the same time as each other, let alone sing at the same time as each other. And we were very much in the middle of lockdown, and choirs were not allowed to meet. And you know, we were only allowed to meet 6 people unless you worked at Downing Street or whatever it was. And Anna said, could I write an anthem for an online Compline service? And so obviously it had to be one line at a time. And I just thought in terms of choosing text, it would be fun to do an acrostic. So I just went through the Coverdale Psalter and I chose, 14 lines from the Psalms that have something to do with, you know, misery. I got the word plague in there. I was quite proud of that. But that the first letter of the Coverdale translation spells out quarantine. And I wrote it as a single part motet, and the idea was that everyone on the call could sing one line each, and it's a sort of meditative psalm. But I specifically wrote it so that eventually, when we were allowed to gather again, it could be sung in real life, but also in harmony. So you can sing it one line at a time. You can sing it in a 2-part canon or a 4-part canon, or as you saw, as I multi-tracked it, up to a 40-part canon. And I had quite a lot of fun with it as well. I take photographs in my spare time, and I took some photographs of of a recent photo shoot earlier in the year from Candlemas at Ely Cathedral, and where we lighted the building with sort of 700 candles. And I put them so that anyone using my piece on a Zoom call could take the photographs and put them as their virtual background. And then you can set it all up so that it looked like you were in a church service. So as I say, the more constraints I had, the easier I found it to write.
That's really interesting you should say that, because in the last Composers in Conversation episode with Catherine Parton, she was saying precisely the same thing. This idea that one is just more inventive when there's something to kind of kick against.
I'm always reminded, do you know the Oulipo, who are an early 20th century French writers consort? There's an entire novel that doesn't use the letter E. The whole book, there isn't a single E in it. And that's the kind of, I mean, that in French too, I mean, that's an impressive constraint.
Yeah, it was certainly one that would be well beyond me, I think. But strangely enough, despite the piece being canonic and through its use of an acrostic, kind of harking back to some of the procedures of 500 years ago, what I found also particularly fascinating about In Te Domine Speravi is that it sounds at times like early Steve Reich. So I don't know.
Well, I said that about it. It's basically Thomas Tallis meets Steve Reich. So.
Yeah, that's fantastic. A really, really interesting sound. So that brings me neatly onto the next topic that I would like to ask you about, which is basically in 2 parts. First of all, among contemporary composers, who do you look up to? Who do you admire? So do you have a particular hero or heroine among living composers or recently departed ones?
I mean, I don't know about hero or heroine. I love the music of James Macmillan. I love
Right.
the music of Cecilia McDowell, Kathleen Allen, fabulous. She's a young Canadian composer, wonderful music. Um, I'm a, I mean, in the 20th century, I'm a huge fan of Howells, Britton, Leighton, and but I also love early music as well. I can do without most Viennese masses, if truth be told.
Right. Okay.
Apart from the ones that are pretending to be earlier, so like the C minor mass of Mozart and the Requiem. But if I had to, it's not a contemporary composer, but if I had to take only one person with me, it would be J.S. Bach, and I don't really need anyone else.
No, quite understandable. I think if it were me, I'd take Josquin, although, he wasn't terribly good company, but there you go. I think he'd soon get fed up with me pestering him to teach me how to write canons and what have you. So that's kind of answered both questions, because I was also going to ask you, which historic figure do you admire the
Yeah,
most?
it just is Bach. And my big lockdown project, apart from this, which arrived yesterday, just a little plug, very exciting.
Can you just show it again, please? Wow. Oh, wow. Wow, fantastic. So you read a book. Gosh,
Yes.
I shall have to go out and buy it.
But yeah, my lockdown project was the Goldberg Variations, which I finished. I recorded in Ely Cathedral on the Steinway D, well, just a year ago. So that'll be coming out at some point soon, I hope.
Yes,
So,
of course. That actually has quite an interesting Canadian connection, because, of course, Glenn Gould. So I have both of his recordings, and that is, I have a small select group of CDs that I keep in my car that I listen to repeatedly, and the 1981 recording of the Goldbergs is among those. But what I would like to ask about your recording about the Goldbergs is, does it also include the set of canons that was discovered in the 70s, which had just been kind of hidden away in the title pages?
no, because it's already 2 discs. So
Fair enough.
I did all the repeats. So yeah.
Okay, well, I shall very much look forward to hearing that in due course. Okay, so moving on to another one of your pieces, there is the hymn Sing My Soul, and I thought this was a really excellent 21st century carol. It seemed to, sorry, it's not carol, hymn tune. So it seemed to kind of be very much in the kind of spirit of Thornbury and woodlands. Very
Yeah, Guiding Power is the other one I had in my head. Yeah, written by Selwyn alumnus. Yeah, I was quite pleased with that tune, but I mean, it's funny, it gets sung quite a bit in the States, but as an anthem. I don't know how many congregations have it. If you buy a set of copies, you get the last verse, so you can put it in you can put the words and the music, whatever, in your service sheet, so the congregation can sing along. And I don't know. I mean, I think the problem is that something else that came out just at the beginning of COVID. So congregations have not been allowed to sing. They weren't for such a long time. It sort of got into the repertoire of a couple of choirs, but as an anthem, which is fine because it works as an anthem, but it was very much conceived as a hymn. Its very first performance, which was shortly before the pandemic, was done congregationally as a hymn because it was written in honor, it was commissioned in honor of a friend of mine's retirement from his church. And so the organist at the church taught it to the congregation sort of surreptitiously so that he didn't know it was happening. And then on his final Sunday, they sang it for him. So that was really nice. But yeah.
Well, that's a magnificent tune. Okay, so that moves me on to another issue, is about key aesthetic values. So what is it that you prize the most in your work? So, for example, do you value originality very highly, or is it the beauty and sensuousness of melody and harmony? What is it is kind of first and foremost what you most want to achieve in your music?
That's a good question. geeky, good technique, I think, is one of the first things. I want, especially if it's sung, I want whoever's singing it to have a chance actually to use the instrument. So I don't do a lot of oohing and awing and sort of off the voice stuff that can be popular. I want the piece to have a shape. So it feels, I mean, dare I said, I don't want to use the word journey, but I want it to feel like it has a beginning, a middle, and an end, and something special at the golden section. And, you know, so the overall shape of the piece actually is complete. I like the little geeky things. I mean, one of the pieces that I wrote that's in the second volume of The Multitude of Voices, so the Upper Voices volume, is a canon. Well, it's not a canon. It's an anthem for Trinity Sunday, and it's in 3/1 time and in E flat major, and it's in either one part or three parts, and the organ part requires a tierce, and also in Little Cantus Firmus I got in 3 really well-known Trinity hymns, including St. Patrick's breastplate, that are hidden. So unless you analyze the piece, you won't know they're there. But it was very satisfying, you know, to implant them in a sense. So that's the sort of geeky OCD kind of technique stuff that I like. I suppose, yeah, I like writing singable music. I want people to sing it. I want even professional singers to feel like I don't write particularly hard music, and I'd like some, you know, I think Crux Fidelis, for example, although it splits into 8 parts, actually there isn't a single line that isn't actually really obvious how it goes, and it should be manageable by any parish choir that's got enough people. And in fact, it has been sung by a number of parish choirs with children and adults, and so yeah, those sorts of things. Originality, no, I don't even think about that. There's no point in that, because that's that, you know, I mean, I've just written a Missa Brevis for a church in the States, and, you know, I mean, surely after the B minor mass, everything that's been said about the words, you know, sanctus, sanctus, sanctus has already been said. Nobody needed to do anything after that. So there's no point in trying to do something original just for the sake of doing it, being original.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose it goes back to what I was saying earlier about not forcing it, because sometimes when you simply relax and just write without worrying about it, either because you've just got no time to worry, or because you're just in a very relaxed and laid-back mood, sometimes out of that, all of those pieces that you've accumulated over the years can suddenly come together, and I suppose that can create a kind of unforced originality where you're authentic.
Yeah, it's funny actually. Somebody, wonderful canon precentor at York Minster, who used to be a canon at Ely, she said she always knows if I've written the piece, and I don't think of myself as having a kind of, you know, like Leighton, Kenneth Leighton. You always know it's Leighton because it's got those little ticks in it, and you know, or as Bach, you always know it's Bach, or you know, whatever. I didn't think you could tell that with my music, but Canon Vicky is determined. She's sure that that you can. So obviously something's working there, but.
Definitely. So this takes me to the sort of $64,000 question, which is, where do you think 21st century choral music is heading? Do you see the return to tonality continuing? Do you think that music could even take off in more surprising directions, such as the exploration of microtones? And do you think, even in the context of church music, it might be possible to start doing really outrageous things, such as harnessing electronics, for example?
I mean, some people are doing that already. There's a good friend of mine who's an organist in Germany who is brilliant, and she often does stuff with electronics. And wasn't there, I can't remember who the composer was, but didn't St. John's just premiere a piece that was choir and electronics? I mean, I think the return to tonality is the more interesting question. I think that will stay. Now, it's not to say that people won't develop other things as well. But I think that side of it will stay, and that it's no longer shameful to write in a tonal idiom. In the way, even I think in the 1970s and 80s, it was, you know, well, you're not doing anything. If you're writing chords that sound nice, then you're just writing pop music. But actually, I don't think people think that as much anymore. And I think in particular, any, you know, liturgical context is not, it's not really the opportunity, the appropriate opportunity for ridiculous experimentation just for its own sake, because actually there's a higher purpose there. So any composer who's writing music that's going to last for the liturgy must be serving that higher purpose, rather than you know, specifically trying to innovate something, is what I would argue. I'm certainly, I'm not a fan of plinky plonky music. I'm not a fan of music that doesn't actually sound nice in some way. And it's not that I don't like dissonance, don't get me wrong, I love dissonance, but I like my dissonance to be treated with respect. And usually that means it needs to be prepared and resolved. Also, you know, running a choir of young people, you can't, you know, even, yes, I'm in Cambridge, and of course I've got a fantastic choir, and you know, they're bright singers and stuff, but we still have next to no rehearsal time. They're not professionals. 80% of them are not reading music for their degree. So I can't give them, you know, and we have to prepare evensong 3 times a week. So totally impractical music that's difficult just for the sake of being difficult just doesn't make it onto my music list, I'm afraid, because life's too short.
Yeah, exactly. Probably, I think I've kind of covered all of the topics that I'd prepared. So I wondered if there's anything specifically that you would like to kind of talk about.
There's one, if anyone's out there listening and wants a sort of Christmas version of Crux Fidelis, I have written one, a set of carols called The Manger is Empty, to wonderful words by R.S. Thomas, which is a sort of triptych, which is something that I was particularly proud of. And it's published with Banks Music, and it hasn't taken off as much as I would have hoped. I think it's actually a rather better piece than Crux Fidelis, but which, you know, that's just me. But it was interesting because that one I spent more time thinking about, partly because it was a 3-movement thing, and there's a number of sort of fun things in there as well, where a D sharp in the first movement functions differently in the third movement. It becomes an E flat, and sort of the particular techniques like that. And the middle movement is a really quick kind of scherzo, I guess, really, with split soprano running a little bit along the lines of Benjamin Britten, Hymn to Saint Cecilia, you know, I can that bit, and then 2 tunes that get combined midway through, and also sort of lots of connections between the 3 movements, and they can be done separately, but it's quite an effective 3-part set for. So that's when I realized I was supposed to say something about the piece that I thought of. That's the one. It's called The Manger is Empty, and it's published by Banks. And then the other thing is my book, which was published yesterday by August Press from Tennessee, and is now actually available on Amazon in UK, Canada, and States. And it's a compendium of 10 years worth or 12 years worth of essays that I've written every month for the American Organist magazine. And it's got a foreword by John Rutter, and it's lovely photographs. Well, of me, apart from that, it's of me by John's son Nicholas, who's a photographer. So there you go. There's my shameless plug.
No, not at all. Absolutely. I mean. So this is the second part of Composers in Conversation, episode 3. With the wonderful Sarah MacDonald as my guest. We've both our guest composer in November 2022. And we're coming towards the end of our time together. And I would like to ask you, Sarah, given that you are so incredibly busy, why do you ever get time just to enjoy some hobbies and pastimes? And did you want to say more about that?
I only have one hobby, and that is taking photographs. I have a very nice camera, and basically I don't do it nearly as often as I would like, but I tend to take it with me whenever I go for a walk, and I try. I mean, I'm more likely in the sort of not in full term time to get out with my camera, but I spend some time editing them and put them up on social media. Basically, is about all I do with them. But I don't do it very often because I'm mostly working. So
I mean, I find also that I don't really have many hobbies because I find composing music and researching and teaching to be incredibly absorbing. I find it um, very, very satisfying to help other people and to watch other people grow and to be part of that. Um, so I think we're both very blessed in being able to do things that are thoroughly absorbing because I don't mind the work, to be honest.
yeah, no, I agree, and I could do without a fair bit of the email, but and you know the sort of boring bits of the admin, but the actual making music, it's just that's sort of what I was put here for. So I just do it because I can't really do much else.
Well, one might say that you were born to make music. Your birthday happens to be St. Cecilia's Day, 22nd of November.
Yes, and my parents were both musicians, are both musicians, but I was unplanned, so they were delighted as well. So,
Okay, well, I would like to thank you very much for sparing some time in your very busy schedule to speak to me. It's been a fascinating discussion, and I look forward very much to hearing the recording of the Goldberg variations and also getting stuck into your new book. And I look forward to hearing many more of your wonderful conversations. So thank you again, Sarah. And um, um,
thank you very much indeed for having me. It's been a lovely chat.